Welcome back to the Jackson Neill Sports Podcast here on Friday, January 18th, 2019. Continuing a good first week back for me here in the first month of the new year. It's been a really, really busy time for sports right now. Coming up this Sunday are the NFL Conference Championship games. Really looking forward to watching those. However, it is the lower level of football, college football, that seems to be making a lot of headlines recently. And a lot of those headlines you're seeing, especially this season, have been involving transfers, whether it's people like Kelly Bryant, now Jalen Hurts going to Oklahoma. These are big-name QBs. These are big-name players changing schools. And we've already seen in some other programs how that can lead to success. Think Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray at Oklahoma, transfer players. So in order to talk about all that, I brought on Chris Hummer from 24/7 Sports. I had a really fun time talking with him about how the transfer landscape in college football has really changed in recent years, why it has, who are some players that we've already seen announced that they're going to be transferring right now, and some other guys we should be looking out for to see where they'll change schools to. Overall, how has the transfer process in college football changed in recent years?
Yeah, it's pretty noticeably shifted in terms of both how we view the transfer process and how it plays out publicly. I think with this change with the transfer portal, we're seeing players have more agency than ever. Where in the past there were rules restricting players from having contact with schools, and they would have to clear their transfer release with the school that they're at. Now all they have to do is tell a school, hey, I'd like to enter the transfer portal, and in 2 days after that, they're in the system, and any school can contact them and potentially recruit that player. In the past, it was a much more arduous process for a player. You had to get clearance from your school, and then before you got contacted by other schools, you had to have a list of schools that you could not hear from in a lot of cases. Coaches used to restrict where you could transfer to, and while we still see a little bit of that, I think there's much more freedom for players now, and it's created kind of like a pseudo-free agency period in college football.
Yeah, because that's what I was going to say, is that just in the past several years, it seems like, this year we've just already seen a lot of headlines, last year as well, about transferring in college football. And like you said, it gives a lot of a lot of power to the players, at least. So is there any specific reason why it changed like this, or was it just a constant evolution by college football?
Yeah, I mean, there's been legislation from different conferences and different organizations pushing for for a shift in the transfer rules the last few years. We've seen it, and it's kind of come incrementally. The big shift was the NCAA introducing the transfer portal. I believe this October. I think it started October 15th or something like that. And that allowed players to do, as I said earlier, to kind of have a little freedom in the way they explored transferring. You go on the transfer portal, any school can contact you, and that's just legislation's built up over the years. We're going to see more of it potentially this off season. There will be proposals to further remove restrictions on players. A lot of people would like to see a system in which, let's say, a player's coach leaves for another school. In that instance, players on the roster would have the opportunity to leave without restriction to go somewhere else. There's still a big issue with players having to sit out a year if they transfer as an underclassman. A lot of the people we're seeing transferring right now are graduate transfers, so they have immediate eligibility elsewhere. But if you haven't graduated yet, you still have to sit a year at what other school you choose to go to. We are seeing a lot of waivers that kind of contest that. You'll see Justin Fields and Tate Martell contest that rule this offseason. A couple of high-profile quarterback transfers at Ohio State and Miami. But right now, there are still quite a few restrictions, and I think as the seasons go by and the years go by, we'll start seeing those things get knocked off, because I think the winds have kind of shifted towards kind of being player-focused in these parts of the college football landscape.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly. And I think a big repercussion that this has, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but isn't the initial recruiting process, getting players out of high school. How do you think this whole, ability to transfer for players, how do you think that's changing the recruiting process, if at all, really?
I don't think it impacts high school recruiting very much. Players are still going to pick where they want to go, and players are still going to kind of pick by whatever measures they do things by. Excuse me. But in terms of how it measures up with high school recruiting, not too much. I would think players are going to be a little more conscientious of where they pick to go. If you're at a position like quarterback where only one player can play, you obviously have to consider that if you go into a stacked room, there's a possibility you're going to have to transfer down the line. And I suppose this adjusted period of transferring makes that a little easier. But in terms of the way players pick schools, I don't think it'll shift that much. I do think this period makes things a lot harder on coaches. We have the early signing period, which is already kind of a rushed thing for schools that are playing, let's say, the championship games. They get one less week to prepare, and then also teams are preparing for bowl games during the middle of a really busy recruiting period. So that's a big deal. And then you come right after that, and you have the transfer portal period, which is kind of a new thing in college football in January. And you essentially have to re-recruit part of your roster. So not only are you recruiting kids to come to your roster, you're recruiting kids to stay on your roster, and you're recruiting other kids to come to your roster. And that's created a lot of, I don't want to say headaches on coaches. They get paid pretty well to do this, but it has created an additional level of stress during that December, January, February period.
Yeah, I think we can really start to see that in December. I mean, that early signing period. I think majority of the recruits even signed during that, so it's starting to be considered just the signing period at this point. And now we're still seeing transfer moves right now, and I kind of want to move into that. So right now, as of now, who are some of the big name transfers that have already happened in college football this year?
Yeah, I think Jalen Hurts is probably the biggest one. Former Alabama quarterback, national champion, got benched for Tua Tagovailoa this past season. He opted to graduate transfer, which means he's eligible next season at Oklahoma. Obviously, that Oklahoma pairing can be pretty potent. Lincoln Riley, the head coach there, has produced back-to-back Heisman winners, and Jalen Hurts is the third straight transfer to kind of take the starting job there. With Jalen under center, Oklahoma is again the favorite for a Big 12 championship, and they won 4 in a row at that. Justin Fields, the former Georgia Bulldog quarterback, is a huge deal. He was number 2 overall in the 24/7 Sports Composite rankings in the 2018 class. He actually had the same ranking via our service that Trevor Lawrence did, the Clemson quarterback who just won a national championship. So him going to Ohio State's a pretty huge thing. If he's eligible next year, which is possible because his family is pursuing a waiver, that would instantly change the landscape of the Big Ten. Tate Martell, who's another big-name quarterback who was at Ohio State, decided to transfer when Fields kind of arrived on campus. Went to Miami. He's another guy pursuing a waiver. If he's eligible next year, it can kind of change the outlook of the Hurricanes this season under Manny Diaz. And there's lots of other moves. I think most of the notable ones are quarterbacks. You got Kelly Bryant, the former Clemson quarterback, going to Missouri. He'll take over for Drew Lock. Austin Kendall, the former Oklahoma quarterback who left after Jalen Hurts went to Oklahoma, is going to West Virginia, where he'll take over for Will Greer as a graduate transfer. And these kind of moves have a domino effect. So we're seeing them happen all over the country.
Mm-hmm. And that would be the big position. You listed all those names. It's all centers around the quarterback position right now. And while other position players are transferring, it seems like the QB position has really taken the most advantage of this new rule. And you mentioned Oklahoma, where Jalen Hurts is going. They had Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, both transfers. Do you think a program like Oklahoma, maybe not to the extent of 3 straight transfer quarterbacks, but a program where like you said, West Virginia, they get done with one quarterback in Will Greer and they move on to another transfer quarterback. Do you think that's going to start to become more of the norm in college football?
I think it's a potential where quarterbacks at perhaps a lower level, maybe an F or kind of a group of 5 conference, kind of want to step up into the Power 5. We saw that with Riley Neal, who's going to be the new starting quarterback at Vanderbilt next season. They'll look for an opportunity to move up. And it's also going to be an opportunity, as we saw with Oklahoma and West Virginia, to plug some holes in maybe your roster that you have. Oklahoma's got a 5-star quarterback coming in, Spencer Rattler, who's going to be really good in a year. But Jalen Hurts is going to serve as potentially the best bridge quarterback possible. So there will be instances where teams can look to fill roster deficiencies on this free agent market that we've kind of stumbled into. But I still don't. The transfer portal is always going to be a supplemental thing for a roster. you can't compete for championships if you're relying solely on transfers. They can kind of augment what you already have. But at the end of the day, college football still comes down to recruiting and development, and nothing's going to replace that.
Gotcha. Definitely. I mean, yeah, you're right. I mean, you look at these positions, it's like you need to build, like you said, build through recruiting, develop the rest of your roster, because if you look at the names that are currently still available in the transfer portal, you can't build an entire roster out of all of that. And I would just ask, so what are some of the remaining players that we haven't really talked about, and maybe not even in the quarterback position, who are undecided as of right now in terms of where they're going to go?
I mean, there are probably hundreds of players who are considering transferring and haven't decided where they're going to go. Penn State saw a mass exodus. A guy like Lamont Wade, a former top 50 prospect from Penn State, he's a safety, he's on the market. Jalen Phillips from UCLA, he initially retired earlier this year, but he's considering transferring to USC and Stanford. He's a former number 1 overall prospect in the country. We saw Bubba Bolden, a former USC player, a 5-star guy, transfer to Miami earlier this year at the safety position. He'll join Tate Martell there. There are a number of really talented players that are on the market, and quarterback moves will always make the biggest difference because no position impacts the game like quarterback. But we've also seen a number of other impact moves. Aubrey Solomon, a former 5-star defensive tackle at Michigan, is heading to Tennessee. He's really going to anchor the Vols offensive line in 2 years when he's eligible. That was a huge recruiting win. A guy like TJ McCoy, starting center from Florida this past season, can really shore up offensive line issues somewhere else if somebody goes after a grad transfer. So there are a lot of players still out there.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess this is starting to become the new norm when the season's not already over when the championship game ends, as we're starting to see more and more players move. Thank you, Chris, for doing this interview. Where can people check your stuff out at?
Yeah, you can find my stuff on 247sports.com. I encourage everybody to check the site out during January and February. It's a busy time of the year.
Definitely. I'll have the links to your Twitter, your articles, everything like that. Thank you so much, Chris, for doing this.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, man. Have a good one.
Again, a big thank you to Chris for coming on to the podcast. Remember, go down in the description on whatever platform you're listening to this on. I mean, we're on iTunes, YouTube, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Spotify, anywhere you like to listen to podcasts, you can find this one. So go down in the description on any one of those platforms and find out his stuff. Also down there are links to my Instagram and Twitter at Jackson Neill 20 for both to catch links to all my other podcasts. Some Anything Goes musician interviews are coming out soon. Hopefully some new music podcasts soon as well. So you can catch all of those if you follow those social medias. And look out for next week, because I think I got some pretty cool stuff in store. So always make sure to check out all of the podcast feeds. Like I said, SoundCloud, iTunes, Spotify. Those are some of my favorites. Also on YouTube, if I have some possible video interviews coming out. So stay tuned for all of that. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you all next time.